The ocean is deep, dark, and full of secrets. Tonight, we are exploring the scariest place on Earth, the bottom of the sea. I have gathered 5 stories about what happens when you dive too deep and what might follow you back up. So, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and listen close. Here is the first story. Story 1. The Thing on Leg 4. They call it the Black Gold City, but that makes it sound majestic. It isn't. It is a rust bucket fortress sitting in the middle of the most hostile ocean on Earth. This is the Piper Alpha 2 oil rig, located 200 miles off the coast of Aberdeen in the North Sea. It is a massive steel island, a labyrinth of pipes, gantries, and flares, standing on 4 concrete legs that plunge 500 feet down to the freezing ocean floor. I have worked on the Piper for 6 years. My name is Jack. I am a structural welder. My job is simple. I find the cracks in the world, and I seal them back up with fire and steel. The North Sea is brutal. It doesn't just have weather. It has moods. And all of them are angry. The waves here are like moving mountains, gray and heavy, capable of snapping a supply ship in half. The wind screams constantly, a low, atonal note that vibrates in your teeth even when you're trying to sleep. The salt water eats everything. It eats the paint, it eats the bolts, it eats the steel, and if you stay out here long enough, it starts to eat you too. I usually work the graveyard shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It is quieter then. Most of the crew is asleep in the habitat modules. It is just me, the wind, and the welding torch. I like the isolation. Or at least, I used to. Last Tuesday, the storm came in. It wasn't a normal winter squall. The meteorologists called it a cyclonic anomaly, which is fancy talk for a hurricane that shouldn't exist. The sky turned a color I had never seen before, a bruised purple and black, like a hematoma spreading across the horizon. By 9 p.m., the waves were hitting the bottom deck, which is usually 60 feet above the waterline. The whole rig, all 40,000 tons of it, was groaning. You could hear the steel complaining under the stress. I was in the workshop, sharpening my tungsten rods, when the phone rang. It was Henderson, the night foreman. "Jack, get to the office," he said. His voice was tight. "Now." I walked through the corridors. The rig was vibrating. Coffee cups were rattling on the tables. When I got to the control room, Henderson was staring at a bank of monitors. He looked pale. "We have a problem," he said, not looking away from the screen. "Sensor 4 on leg 4 is red." I looked at the schematic. Leg 4 was the furthest support pillar from the main habitat. It stood out in the darkness, isolated. The sensor light was blinking a furious crimson. "Stress fracture?" I asked. "A big one," Henderson nodded. The strain gauge jumped from 2% to 80% in 10 minutes. If that leg buckles, the center of gravity shifts. The whole rig tips over into the drink. I looked out the reinforced window. The rain was hammering against the glass so hard it sounded like gravel. "In this weather? You want me to go out on the gantry in a hurricane?" "I don't have a choice, Jack." "And neither do you," Henderson said, finally turning to face me. "Put your harness on. Double clips. Take the emergency radio. Just go look at it. If it's a surface crack, weld it. If it's deep, well, pray." I cursed, but I grabbed my gear. I put on my heavy orange waterproofs, my helmet with the built-in lamp, and my welding pack. The pack weighed 50 pounds, but it felt heavier tonight. I walked out onto the lower deck. The wind hit me like a solid wall. I had to lean forward at a 45-degree angle just to stay standing. The rain was horizontal. It stung my face like needles, finding the tiny gaps between my collar and my helmet. To get to leg 4, you have to walk along a narrow metal walkway called the catwalk. It is a steel grate, 2 feet wide, suspended over the abyss. You can look right down through your boots and see the ocean churning below. Usually, the water is dark. But tonight, the white caps were phosphorescent with foam. It looked like a boiling cauldron of milk and oil. I clipped my safety line to the railing. Click. I took a step, then another. Clang, clang, clang. My heavy boots hit the metal grate. The sound was swallowed instantly by the roar of the wind. It took me 20 minutes to walk 100 yards. Every time a gust hit, I had to crouch and hold the railing with both hands. The spray from the waves was hitting me, soaking my gloves. That meant the waves were cresting at 60 feet. When I finally reached leg 4, I saw the damage. Henderson was right. It was bad. A primary support beam, a massive H-beam as thick as a tree trunk, had cracked. It was a jagged tear in the steel, about 2 feet long. It looked like the metal had been pulled apart by giant hands. I see it. I yelled into my radio, pressing the mic against my throat to cut the wind noise. The beam is sheared. I can patch it, but I need to get underneath it. I have to go down to the maintenance platform. Copy that. Henderson's voice crackled in my ear. Be careful, Jack. The wind speed is increasing. I climbed down the service ladder to the maintenance platform. This platform hangs right under the main deck, bolted directly to the concrete leg. It is a dark, wet, miserable place. The rig's main floodlights don't reach down here. It is just a cage of rusted steel hanging over the ocean. I turned on my helmet lamp. The beam cut through the driving ring. I could see the concrete leg disappearing into the black water below. I hooked my harness to the platform railing. I set up the welder. I struck the arc. ZZZZT. The bright blue light sizzled. For the next 30 minutes, I was in my own world. I focused entirely on the puddle of molten steel. I laid bead after bead, stitching the wound in the metal shut. My arms burned from the effort. My eyes watered from the fumes. I finished the root pass and stopped to change the welding rod. I flipped my welding visor up. That is when I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the waves. Slap, slap, drag. It was a wet sound. Heavy, like a wet towel being slapped against concrete. I froze. I held my breath. Slap, slap, drag. It was coming from below me. From the ladder I had just climbed down? No, from the concrete leg itself. I crawled to the edge of the platform and peered through the grating. My helmet light swept across the maintenance platform. It was empty, but then the light caught something on the floor near the base of the ladder. A puddle, but it wasn't water. It was thick. It was viscous. It glowed a faint, sickly green in the beam of my light. I reached out and touched it with my gloved finger. It was slime. Mucus. It smelled terrifying. A mix of rotten fish, ammonia, and copper. Henderson. I keyed the radio. Did you send a diver down? Or a sub? Static hissed. Negative, Jack. No diving ops in a storm. What? There is sludge down here, I said, my voice shaking. And I heard something moving. Probably just seaweed thrown up by the swell. Henderson said dismissively. Finish the weld, Jack. I looked at the slime on my glove. Seaweed didn't smell like copper. Seaweed didn't sound like wet footsteps. I stood up. I unplugged the welding torch from the power unit, but I kept the rod in the holder. It was a sharp piece of tungsten. A shiv. Hello. I yelled over the wind. No answer. I walked to the railing that overlooked the ocean. I leaned over. I shone my light down the length of the concrete leg. At first, I saw nothing but rain and blackness. Then, a flash of lightning lit up the sky. It was a massive fork that illuminated the entire North Sea for a split second. And I saw it. About 50 feet below me, clinging to the vertical side of the concrete leg, was a shape. It was big, maybe the size of a cargo van. It was flat and wide, pressed against the concrete like a tick. It had pale, gray skin that glistened wetly. I blinked, wiping the rain from my eyes. The thing was moving. It had limbs, too many of them. 6, 8. They were long, multi-jointed arms that ended in black, hooked claws. It was jamming the hooks into the concrete to pull itself up. Chunk, chunk, chunk. It was climbing fast. It moved with a jerky, insect-like rhythm. I keyed the radio, screaming now. Henderson, there is something on the leg. It's climbing up. What? Henderson shouted. A seal? A whale? No. It's a monster. I screamed. I knew how crazy it sounded. I didn't care. It's coming up to the platform. The thing stopped moving. It froze on the side of the pillar. It heard me. Slowly, the top part of the creature peeled away from the concrete. A head turned to look up at me. It didn't have a face. It just had a mouth. A perfectly round, circular maw filled with rows of spinning teeth, like a lamprey eel magnified 1,000 times. And around the mouth, there were feelers. Long, waving milky white tentacles that tasted the air. It let out a shriek. It wasn't a roar. It sounded like high-tension wire snapping. Aye. Then it jumped. It didn't climb the last 20 feet. It coiled its legs and launched itself upwards. Boom. It slammed into the underside of the metal platform I was standing on. The floor buckled upwards. The impact knocked me off my feet. I slammed into the welding unit. My helmet flew off, clattering across the grate. Darkness. I scrambled in the dark, feeling for my helmet. The platform was shaking violently. The creature was underneath me, clinging to the bottom of the grate like a spider. I could hear its claws scrabbling on the steel mesh. Scritch, scritch. It was testing the metal, looking for a weak point, looking for a way in. I found my helmet and jammed it back on. The light beam swung wildly. I looked down at my feet. A hook, a long, black bone hook, poked through the holes in the grate. It was right next to my boot. It hooked onto the steel mesh and pulled. Creowalk. The bolts holding the grate down started to pop. I scrambled backward, crab walking away from the center of the platform. I was still clipped to the safety line. If the floor gave way, I would be left dangling in midair, a worm on a string for this thing to eat. I fumbled with the carabiner. My fingers were numb with cold and fear. Pop. A section of the grating ripped open. A hole, 3 feet wide, appeared in the floor. A hand, gray, slimy, and human-like, but with webbed fingers, reached through. It slapped onto the deck plate. Then another hand. It was pulling itself up. I unclipped my line just as the creature's head rose through the hole. The smell hit me first. It was a physical blow. The stench of deep-sea rot. The creature hauled its bulk onto the platform. In the light of my lamp, it was hideous. Its body was segmented, covered in translucent plates of armor. Inside the translucent shell, I could see organs pulsing. It turned its eyeless head toward me. The tentacles around its mouth twitched. It sensed my heat. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping a valve. I grabbed the only weapon I had. My chipping hammer. It was a small, steel hammer used to knock slag off a weld. It was nothing against this nightmare. The creature lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, a blur of gray motion. I swung the hammer blindly. I aimed for the center of that toothy mouth. Crack. I felt the impact vibrate up my arm. The hammer had smashed into the creature's teeth. It screeched. It thrashed backward, its claws slipping on the wet metal. It hadn't expected resistance. It fell back, toward the hole in the grate. But it didn't fall through. It caught the edge with one of its rear legs. It hung there, half in and half out, snapping its jaws at me. I didn't wait. I turned and ran for the ladder. I scrambled up the rungs, slipping on the wet metal. I didn't look down. I could hear the thing scrambling to regain its footing below me. Slap, slap, drag. It was coming after me. I reached the catwalk. The wind hit me again, trying to blow me off the rig. I didn't clip on. There was no time. I ran along the narrow grating, balancing over the abyss. Behind me, I heard a metallic clang. The creature had reached the top of the ladder. I risked a glance backward. It was scuttling along the underside of the catwalk railing. It was moving upside down, hand over hand, faster than I could run. It was gaining on me. Henderson, open the airlock. I screamed into the radio. Open the south door. I saw the heavy steel door of the living quarters ahead. It was 50 yards away. 40 yards. The creature shrieked again. It was close now. I could hear its wet breathing. 30 yards. I could see the handle of the door turning. Henderson was opening it. 10 yards. I felt something brush my ankle. A tentacle. It wrapped around my boot. I tripped. I fell hard onto the steel grate. The tentacle tightened. It pulled me backward. I kicked. I screamed. I grabbed the railing with both hands. The creature was pulling me toward the edge. It wanted to drag me down into the water. I looked back. The maw was inches from my boot. The rows of teeth were spinning. Then, a bright light blinded me. Henderson was standing in the doorway. He was holding a flare gun. Thump! A red flare streaked over my head. It hit the creature square in the chest. The magnesium flare ignited. It burned at 2,000 degrees. The creature convulsed. It let go of my leg. It thrashed on the catwalk, shrieking in agony as the fire ate into its wet skin. It rolled off the edge. I watched it fall. It tumbled down, a ball of red fire in the darkness, until it hit the black water 500 feet below. The water swallowed the fire instantly. I crawled the last 10 feet. Henderson grabbed me and dragged me inside. He slammed the heavy steel door and spun the locking wheel. We sank to the floor. The silence of the corridor was deafening after the storm. Henderson looked at me. I was covered in slime. My waterproofs were torn. I was shaking so hard my teeth rattled. "Jack," he whispered. What was that?" I looked at him. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I just pointed at the door. We didn't go back out that night. We didn't send anyone out. The next morning, the storm broke. The sun came out. The North Sea looked calm, blue, and innocent. I quit. I took the first helicopter back to the mainland. I left my tools. I left my clothes. I left everything. They sent a diving team down a week later to inspect Leg 4. They found deep gouges in the concrete, 50 feet up. They said it looked like something massive had been sharpening its claws. They also found something else. Stuck in the grate of the maintenance platform was a tooth. It was 6 inches long, serrated like a steak knife, and made of a black, glass-like material. They sent it to a lab. The lab said it didn't match any known animal on Earth. They said it looked prehistoric. I live in London now. I work in a garage. I fix cars. It is safe. There is no ocean, no storms. But sometimes, when it rains hard, I look at the drains in the street. I see the water swirling down into the dark sewers. And I remember the way that thing moved. I remember how fast it climbed. And I wonder, if it can climb a concrete leg in the middle of the ocean, surely it can climb a drain pipe. And sometimes, late at night, I hear a sound in the pipes of my apartment. Slap, slap, drag. Story 2. The Knock on the Diving Bell. There is no darkness like the darkness at the bottom of the Atlantic. It is a physical weight. It presses against the portholes of the diving bell, waiting for a seal to crack, waiting to crush you into a paste. My name is Miller. I am a saturation diver. For 28 days at a time, I live in a pressurized steel tube, 6 feet wide and 20 feet long, with 2 other men. We breathe a mixture of helium and oxygen that makes our voices sound like cartoon characters. We eat paste. We sleep in bunks the size of coffins. And every morning, we drop 600 feet down into the cold black water to fix oil pipelines. It takes a special kind of crazy to do this job. You have to be okay with the fact that if something goes wrong, you are dead. There is no swimming to the surface. If you tried to swim up from this depth without spending a week decompressing, your blood would boil. You would die screaming before you hit the surface. We are trapped here. By physics. By the ocean. And, as I found out last week, by something else. It was day 18 of the rotation. My partner, a tough-as-nails Scotsman named Davy, and I were in the Bell. The Bell is the small transport capsule that lowers us from the main habitat ship down to the work site. The job was simple. A flange on the main oil line was leaking. We had to go down, hold a clamp on it, and come back up. Ready to drop? The supervisor asked over the comms. His voice sounded tinny in my earpiece. Ready topside, I said. My voice was high and squeaky because of the helium. You get used to it eventually. The winch groaned. The Bell shuddered and started to descend. Through the bottom viewport, the moon pool, I watched the blue water turn green, then gray, then absolute black. We hit working depth at 650 feet. The external lights clicked on, illuminating the muddy ocean floor. The oil pipe looked like a giant, rusting snake half buried in the silt. "All right, Miller," Davy said. "I'm heading out. You stay on the umbilical." In saturation diving, one guy goes out into the water, the diver, and the other guy stays in the bellman, to manage the air hoses and cables. It was Davy's turn to dive. Davy put on his heavy helmet. I locked it into place. He gave me a thumbs up and lowered himself through the moon pool. The moon pool is just a hole in the floor. Because the pressure inside the bell is equal to the pressure of the water outside, the water doesn't rush in. It just sits there, a flat, black mirror at your feet. Davy splashed into the water and disappeared. I watched him on the external camera monitors. He looked like a clumsy astronaut, walking slowly across the seabed, trailing his thick yellow umbilical cable behind him. "I'm at the flange," Davy's voice crackled. "It's leaking pretty bad. Visibility is, wait. What is it?" I asked, watching the monitor. "I thought I saw something," Davy said. "Movement. At my 3 o'clock. I checked the sonar. Scope is clear, Davy. Just you and the fish." "I must be the nitrogen narcosis," Davy grumbled. He started wrenching on the bolts. I sat back in the bellman's chair, watching the gauges. Oxygen levels, steady. Scrubbers, active. Hot water line, operational. 10 minutes passed. Clang. A sound echoed through the bell. I jumped. It sounded like someone had hit the outside of the steel hull with a hammer. "Davy." I keyed the mic. "Did you bump the bell?" "Bump the bell," Davy said. "I'm 50 feet away, Miller. Look at the camera." I looked. On the screen, Davy was still at the pipeline, wrenching on the bolt. He was nowhere near me. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Maybe the cable swung into the hull. Clang, clang. 2 more hits. Harder this time. The bell vibrated. "Topside," I called the ship. "Are you guys moving the winch? We are taking impacts down here." "Negative, Bell," topside replied. "Winch is locked. You are holding steady." "What kind of impacts?" "Metallic," I said. "Like knocking." I looked around the cramped interior of the capsule. It was just pipes, valves, and gauges. There was nowhere to hide. Just me and the black hole in the floor. "Miller." Davy's voice came over the headset. It sounded breathless. "Pull up the slack. I'm coming back." "You finished the job?" I asked. "No," Davy said. "But there is something down here. I can feel it watching me." "I'm pulling," I said. I started reeling in his umbilical cable. I watched the monitor. Davy was walking backwards, facing the darkness beyond the lights. He was holding his welding torch up like a weapon. Then, the camera feed flickered. Static lines rolled across the screen. "Davy, I'm losing video," I said. "I'm almost there," Davy panted. "Just get me in the bell. Open the inner hatch." I waited by the moon pool. I could see the glow of his helmet lights coming up through the black water. He surfaced with a splash. He hauled himself up onto the steel grating floor of the bell. Water dripped from his suit. "Seal it," he yelled. "Seal the moon pool. We can't seal it until we dock." I said. "Calm down, Davy." "What happened?" Davy took off his helmet. His face was pale, sweating. His eyes were wide. "There was a face," he whispered. "In the mud. Right under the pipe. A fish. A human face, Miller. Pale. Bloated. But it blinked." I shook my head. "Nitrogen narcosis. You're hallucinating. Let's get you some oxygen." I helped him out of his suit. We sat on the small bench, waiting for Topside to pull us up. "Topside, this is Bell," I said. "Job aborted. Diver is distressed. Bring us up." "Copy that, Bell." Commencing recovery. The winch groaned again. We felt the lurch as the bell started to rise. We ascended slowly. You can't go up too fast. We were at 500 feet when it happened. Thump. Something heavy landed on the roof of the bell. The whole capsule swung on its cable. Davy grabbed the railing. "What was that?" he hissed. I looked up at the steel ceiling. Something fell on us. Maybe a piece of the rigging. Scrape. A horrible, grinding sound echoed through the tiny room. It sounded like metal claws dragging across the hull. It moved from the center of the roof down the side. "It's outside," Davy whispered. It followed us up. That's impossible, I said. We are moving. Nothing can hang onto a smooth hull in this current. I went to the porthole, a small, round window, 6 inches wide. I pressed my face against the thick glass. It was pitch black outside, but as I watched, something pale slid past the window. It looked like a hand, but the fingers were too long, and they were fused together, like a flipper, but with nails. Did you see it? Davy asked. I backed away from the window. Topside. Emergency. We have something on the bell. Static. Topside. Miller. AE. Interference. AE cable. The radio was cutting out. Bang. 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 The pounding was on the hatch now. The side hatch that connects to the ship. Let me in, a voice said. We both froze. The voice didn't come from the radio. It came through the steel door. It was muffled, distorted by the water and the steel, but it was audible. It was a human voice. Or it was trying to be. Let me in. Who is that? Davy screamed. Is there another diver? There is no other diver. I yelled. It's just us. Cold, the voice moaned. So cold. I looked at the pressure gauge on the hatch. The external pressure was 250 psi. If I cracked that door even a millimeter, the water pressure would shoot through and cut us in half like a laser beam. Don't listen to it, I told Davy. It's a trick. The narcosis. But Davy was staring at the moon pool. The moon pool, the hole in the floor, was supposed to be stable. The air pressure kept the water down. But now, the water was bubbling. Huge bubbles of gas were erupting from the black water. It's tampering with the gas lines, I realized. It's cutting the umbilical. If the umbilical was cut, we lost heat. We lost power. And we lost the helium mix. We would freeze or suffocate in the dark. The lights flickered. The heater whirred and died. The temperature in the bell dropped instantly. The North Atlantic is near freezing at this depth. Davy, manual override on the gas. I shouted, get the emergency tanks. Davy scrambled for the tanks. I grabbed the emergency hammer. I stood over the moon pool. If something came up through that hole, I was going to smash it. The bubbling stopped. The water went still again. The banging on the roof stopped. Silence. We sat there in the dim red emergency light. Our breath was starting to fog up the air. Is it gone? Davy whispered. I looked at the water in the moon pool. It was perfectly flat. A black mirror. Then, I saw the reflection. Reflected in the black water, I could see the ceiling of the bell. I could see the valves. I could see Davy. And I could see me. But directly above me, clinging to the ceiling inside the bell, was a face. I looked up. It was wedged into the pipes at the top of the capsule. It was wet, gray. Its skin was translucent, showing black veins underneath. It had no nose, just 2 slits. And its mouth was open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It had been inside with us. How? The moon pool. While we were looking at the hatch, it had swum up silently and climbed into the piping. It grinned at me. Warm, it hissed. It dropped. It landed on my back. It was heavy and cold, like a slab of wet meat. Its arms wrapped around my neck. The webbed fingers tightened. Get it off, I screamed. I slammed my back against the wall, trying to crush it. Davy screamed and grabbed his welding torch. He swung it, but in the cramped space, he couldn't get a good angle. The creature bit my shoulder. I felt the teeth punch through my thick, wet suit. It burned like fire. I grabbed its arm. The skin was slippery, covered in mucus. I twisted it. I heard a snap. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched whistle that shattered my eardrums. It let go and scrambled up the wall like a spider. It wedged itself back into the darkness of the pipes on the ceiling. Open the gas. I yelled at Davy. Flush it out. Davy grabbed the valve for the pure oxygen purge. That could kill us. The fire risk. Do it. Davy cranked the valve. A blast of high-pressure gas hissed into the chamber. The creature shrieked again. It didn't like the noise. Or maybe the oxygen mix was toxic to it. It dropped from the ceiling and dove straight for the moon pool. Splash. It disappeared into the black water. We huddled in the corner, hammers raised, watching the hole. 5 minutes later, the bell jerked. We felt the clamp of the ship's docking ring lock onto us. We were home. The water drained out of the moon pool as we were pulled into the decompression chamber. The hatch opened. The support crew looked at us. We were shivering, bleeding, and insane with fear. "Get us out," I screamed. "Close the hatch. There's something in the water." They pulled us out. They treated my bite wound. They said it looked like a shark bite, but the radius was too small. We spent 3 days in decompression. 3 days sitting in that chamber, waiting for the nitrogen to leave our blood. Every time the pipes groaned, Davy would jump. They inspected the bell afterwards. They found scratch marks on the roof, deep gouges in the steel, like someone had taken an angle grinder to it. And inside, up in the pipes where it had hidden, they found a layer of dried slime. It analyzed as unknown organic protein. I don't dive anymore. I work in a warehouse now, stacking boxes, on dry land. But sometimes, when I'm in the shower and the steam fills the room, I can smell it. That copper, ammonia smell. And I remember that voice. Let me in. And I wonder if it could hold its breath long enough to swim up to the ship. Maybe it climbed on board before we docked. Maybe it's not in the ocean anymore. Story 3. The ship that should not be there. The ocean is full of ghosts. Not the spectral kind, but the steel kind. There are thousands of ships resting on the bottom of the sea. But the ones that scare me are the ones that are still floating. My name is Captain Elias Thorne. I run a salvage tug called the Iron Mule. We operate out of the North Atlantic, looking for drifting cargo containers, abandoned yachts, or anything valuable that the sea hasn't claimed yet. Under maritime law, if you find an abandoned vessel in international waters, it belongs to you. It's called salvage rights. It is a dangerous way to make a living, but it pays better than fishing. Last November, we were 300 miles east of Nova Scotia. The fog was thick, a gray blanket that muffled the sound of the waves. Radar contact. My first mate, Sarah, said from the bridge. Big blip. 12 miles out. Is it transmitting? I asked. Negative, Sarah said. No AIS transponder. No radio chatter. It's just drifting dead in the water. We changed course to investigate. When the ship emerged from the fog, we all went silent. It was a cruise liner. It looked like something from the 1990s. White hull, tiered decks, rusted railings. But it was listed heavily to the port side, maybe 20 degrees. The name on the stern was faded, almost illegible. The Orion. The Orion? Sarah guessed. I've never heard of it. I looked it up in the registry. There is no Orion missing, I said. This ship doesn't exist. The ship was dark. No running lights. No movement on the decks. Just a silent, white ghost rolling in the swell. We're boarding her, I said. Prepare the launch. Sarah, myself, and our engineer, Mike, took the Zodiac inflatable boat over to the liner. The water was calm, oily and black. The closer we got to the Orion, the colder the air felt. We found a pilot ladder hanging off the side, swaying in the wind. The ropes were rotten, green with algae. I don't like this, Cap, Mike muttered. She feels wrong. Look at the water line. I looked. The hull was clean. Too clean. A ship drifting for years should have barnacles, seaweed, rust. This hull looked like it had been scrubbed. Or licked clean. We climbed the ladder. The deck was silent. The only sound was the creaking of metal and the slap of water against the hull. Hello, I shouted. My voice echoed down the empty promenade. No answer. Let's check the bridge, I said. Find the logbook. We walked through the main atrium. It was lavish, decorated with gold leaf and red velvet. But everything was covered in a layer of fine, gray dust. On the tables in the lounge, there were glasses half full of liquid, plates with food that had turned to black mold. It looked like everyone had just stood up and left in the middle of dinner. We reached the bridge. It was empty. The wheel was lashed straight. The radar screens were dead. I found the captain's log on the chart table. It was open. The last entry was dated October 14th, 1994. 30 years ago. The handwriting was shaky, almost unreadable. Entry: the fog won't lift. The passengers are changing. They are standing at the railings, staring at the water. They say they can hear music coming from the deep. I can hear it too. It sounds like a drum. I am going to lock myself in the cabin. God help us. 1994? Sarah whispered. This ship has been drifting for 30 years? Or has it been? Cap. Mike called from the doorway. You need to see this. Look at the pool deck. We went out onto the wing of the bridge and looked down at the main pool deck. The swimming pool was full, but not with water. It was filled with clothes. Thousands of shirts, dresses, pants, shoes. They were piled high, filling the entire pool. Where are the people? Sarah asked. They didn't leave, I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. They just undressed. Suddenly, the ship groaned. A deep, metallic moan that vibrated through the deck plates. Did you hear that? Mike asked. The engines. Impossible, I said. This ship has been dead for decades. Thrum. It was a rhythmic beating, like a heartbeat, and it was coming from below, from the engine room. We need to check the engines, I said. If there is power, the salvage claim is worth millions. We went down into the belly of the ship. The air got hotter and heavier as we descended. It smelled of sulfur and stagnant water. We reached the engine room door. It was a massive steel bulkhead. It was sealed shut, but someone had welded it. There were thick, messy weld marks all around the door frame. Someone had sealed this door from the outside. They wanted to keep something in. Thrum. The sound was loud now. It was vibrating my teeth. Cap, look at the welding, Mike said, shining his light close. These welds are fresh. There's no rust on them. Fresh? I asked. But the ship is 30 years old. Someone welded this door last week, Mike said, his voice shaking. Then, from inside the engine room, we heard a scratch. Scritch. It sounded like a fingernail on metal. It started at the top of the door and slowly dragged down to the bottom. Then a voice. Is it night time? It was a woman's voice. Soft. Melodic. Sarah backed away. Who is in there? We are hungry, the voice said. The water is sweet, but we need meat. Open the door. A man's voice joined in. Then another. And another. A chorus of whispers from behind the steel wall. Open. We're leaving, I said. Now. We turned to run, but the corridor behind us was blocked. Standing at the end of the hallway was a figure. It looked like a crew member. He was wearing a tattered white uniform, but he was soaking wet. Water dripped from his cuffs, forming a puddle on the floor. He was facing away from us. Excuse me, I said, shining my light on him. Are you a passenger? The man turned around. He didn't have a face. Where his eyes and nose should be, there was just smooth, gray coral. It had grown over his features, sealing them shut. Only his mouth was open, and it was filled with black water. He opened his mouth to speak, but only water spilled out. Gurgle. He raised a hand. His fingers were fused together by barnacles. Run, I yelled. We sprinted the other way, deeper into the ship. We scrambled up a service ladder, emerging into the galley kitchen. The kitchen was full of them. Dozens of figures. Cooks, waiters, passengers in evening gowns. All of them wet. All of them covered in coral and seaweed. They were standing perfectly still, like statues. When we burst in, they all turned their heads in unison. The sound of cracking coral echoed in the room. Don't stop, Mike screamed. We shoved past them. They were cold to the touch, hard as rock. One of them grabbed Sarah's jacket. She screamed and twisted away, leaving the jacket in its stone grip. We reached the deck. The fog had lifted slightly. We could see the iron mule waiting for us. We ran for the pilot ladder. Wait, Sarah stopped. She pointed at the pool. The pile of clothes was moving. Underneath the shirts and dresses, something was shifting. A hand burst out of the pile. Then a head. It was a child. A little girl in a pink dress. She looked perfectly normal. No coral. No water. Help me, she cried. Mommy put me in here to hide. We have to get her, Sarah said, stepping toward the pool. No. I grabbed her arm. Look at her eyes. Sarah looked. The little girl's eyes weren't eyes. They were the eyes of a shark. Black, flat, and lifeless. And when she smiled, her jaw unhinged, revealing row upon row of serrated teeth. She wasn't a child. She was a lure. The pile of clothes exploded. A massive creature erupted from beneath the laundry. It was a crab-like thing, huge and armored, using the clothes as camouflage. The little girl was just an appendage on the end of a long, fleshy tentacle, an anglerfish lure designed to catch sympathetic humans. The crab monster screeched and scuttled toward us, clicking its massive claws. We jumped. We didn't even use the ladder. We leaped over the railing, 40 feet down into the freezing ocean. We hit the water hard. The cold knocked the wind out of me. I surfaced, gasping. Swim, I yelled. We swam for the Zodiac. I could hear the thing on the deck above us, clattering against the railing, shrieking in frustration. We hauled ourselves into the boat and sped back to the Iron Mule. Full throttle. I ordered as soon as we hit the deck. Get us out of here. We steamed away at full speed. I watched the Orion disappear into the fog. As it faded, I saw one last thing through my binoculars. The lights on the cruise ship flickered on. All of them. The deck was suddenly ablaze with party lights. And I could hear music. A slow, distorted waltz drifting over the water. And on the decks, hundreds of figures were dancing. Stiff, jerky movements. The dance of the drowned. We reported the ship to the Coast Guard. They sent a cutter to the coordinates the next day. They found nothing. No ship. No debris. Just empty ocean. But I know it's still out there. Drifting. Waiting for the next salvage crew. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the bridge of my tug at night, I check the radar. And I pray I never see that blip again. Because I know what was behind that welded door in the engine room. It wasn't an engine. It was a nest. Story 4. The light must not go out. They say a lighthouse is a beacon of hope. A guiding star for sailors lost in the dark, promising safety and warm land. But out here, on Black Rock, the light isn't a guide. It is a fence, and I am the gatekeeper. My name is Thomas. I am the keeper of the Black Rock Light, located 25 miles off the coast of Maine. It is an old station built in 1890 from gray granite blocks that were quarried on the mainland and barged out to this godforsaken tooth of rock. There is no island here. There is no beach. At high tide, the Atlantic Ocean laps at the steel door of the tower. At low tide, you get maybe 20 feet of slick, barnacle-covered stone. I have been here for 6 months. It is a lonely life, but I asked for it. After the accident in the city, the car crash that took my hearing in one ear and left me with a limp, I didn't want to be around people anymore. I wanted the quiet. I wanted the rhythm of the waves and the steady thrum-thrum-thrum of the rotation gear in the lantern room. For the first 5 months, it was peaceful. I painted the railings. I polished the brass. I read every book in the small library twice. The only voice I heard was the crackle of the Coast Guard dispatcher on the radio every morning at 8 o'clock for the weather check. But last week, the rhythm changed. A nor'easter blew in, a real monster of a storm. The barometer on the wall dropped so low the glass cracked. By sunset, the sky was a bruised purple color, heavy with rain. The waves were smashing against the gallery deck, 50 feet up. The wind sounded like a freight train screaming in a tunnel, vibrating the stone walls of the tower. I was in the kitchen, making coffee on the propane stove, when the radio crackled to life. It was louder than usual, cutting through the static of the storm. Black Rock, this is Coast Guard Station Portland. Do you copy? I grabbed the mic. Copy, Portland. It's getting hairy out here. Wind speed is gusting to 80 knots. I think I'm going to lose the anemometer. Thomas, listen to me, the voice on the radio said. It wasn't the usual dispatcher, a cheerful kid named Mikey. It was Captain Miller, the station commander. His voice was tight, clipped, and serious. We have reports of debris in the water, moving north with the storm. Debris? I asked, looking out the reinforced porthole. Like a shipwreck? No, Miller said, hesitating. Biological. We lost contact with the fishing trawler Mary Jane an hour ago. Their last transmission was disturbing. They didn't scream about sinking, Thomas. They screamed about the water. They said the water was alive. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Alive? What does that mean? Just keep the light on, Thomas, Miller said, ignoring the question. Whatever you do, keep that main beam spinning. And lock your doors. Bolt the storm shutters. Do not go out on the gallery. Portland out. The radio went dead. Not the static of a lost signal, but a click, like the power had been cut at the source. I stood there in the dim kitchen, listening to the wind. The tower groaned. It was a sturdy building, built to withstand hurricanes, but tonight it felt fragile. I checked the heavy steel door at the base of the tower. I spun the locking wheel until it clanked tight. I threw the deadbolt. Then, I dragged the heavy oak table from the kitchen and shoved it against the door. It seemed silly, a wooden table against a steel door, but I felt a need to barricade myself in. I climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room. The lighthouse is 110 feet tall. There are 140 cast iron steps that wind up through the center. I took them slowly, my bad leg aching with the change in pressure. I reached the top. The lantern room was hot and smelled of oil and ozone. The massive first-order Fresnel lens, a beehive of glass prisms 6 feet tall, was spinning smoothly. In the center, the 1,000-watt bulb burned with a blinding white intensity. Sweep, sweep, sweep. Every 10 seconds, the beam cut a solid cone of light through the driving rain. It illuminated the churning black water below for a split second before swinging out to sea. I grabbed my binoculars and leaned against the glass. I wanted to see this debris. I watched the waves crashing over the base of the rock. White foam, black water. White foam, black water. And then I saw it. In the trough of a massive wave, something was moving against the current. It wasn't a log. It wasn't a seal. It was pale and slick, the color of a dead fish. It was pulling itself out of the water and onto the rock. Then another one. Then 10. Then 100. They were swarming up the granite base of the lighthouse like ants on a sugar cube. I adjusted the focus. The beam swept over them again. My breath caught in my throat. They looked human, but wrong. Distorted. Their limbs were too long, bending in places where there shouldn't be joints. Their skin was gray, glistening with slime. And they had no eyes. Just smooth, blank skin where a face should be, and a round, lamprey-like mouth full of needle teeth that pulsed open and closed. They were climbing fast. They moved on all fours, their long fingers finding purchase in the cracks of the wet stone. I watched as the first one reached the steel door at the base. It reared up on its hind legs, standing 7 feet tall. It sniffed the door, its head waving back and forth like a snake. Then it struck. Thud. The impact shook the tower. The sound vibrated up through the stone floor. Scrapey. Claws dragged down the metal. Long, deep gouges. Let us in, a voice hissed. I jumped back from the glass. The voice didn't come from outside. The storm was too loud for that. The voice came from the pipes. The old ventilation shafts that ran through the walls of the tower. The light, it burns. The voice gurgled. It sounded wet, choking, like someone trying to speak with lungs full of salt water. Turn it off, keeper. I grabbed the emergency phone on the wall. Dead. The line had been cut. I looked down through the floor grate. The spiral staircase was a dark tunnel going down. I heard glass breaking. The kitchen window on the ground floor. They were inside. I heard them hitting the floor. Wet slap. Wet slap. They were pouring in through the broken window. I ran to the trapdoor in the floor of the lantern room. It was a heavy iron hatch. I slammed it shut and spun the latch. It didn't have a lock, just a simple hook. It wouldn't hold them. I looked around for a weapon. There was a tool chest in the corner. I grabbed a heavy iron wrench, the kind used for tightening the main bolts of the lens. It felt heavy and cold in my hand. I heard them on the stairs. Slap, 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 slap. It wasn't the slow shuffle of a zombie. It was the rapid, scurrying sound of a cockroach. They were rushing up the stairs, tripping over each other in their haste to get to me, to get to the light. They hate the light, I whispered to myself. Captain Miller had said it. Keep the beam spinning. I looked at the lens. It was rotating smoothly. But the lower part of the tower, the stairwell, was in darkness. That's why they could enter. I dragged the tool chest over the trapdoor. It weighed 200 pounds. It would buy me time. Boom. Something hit the trapdoor from below. The tool chest jumped an inch off the floor. Open it. The wet voices whispered, now coming through the gap in the floorboards. We are cold. We want the warmth. We want the meat. Go away. I screamed, my voice cracking. I have a gun. I didn't have a gun. I had a flare gun in the emergency box, but that was it. Boom. Boom. They were throwing themselves against the hatch. The iron hinges groaned. Then, silence. The banging stopped. The scratching stopped. I waited, gripping the wrench. Sweat was running down my back. Had they given up? Then I heard a new sound. Tink. 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 It was coming from outside. On the glass. I looked up. A face was pressed against the storm glass of the lantern room. It had climbed the outside of the tower. 110 feet of vertical brick in a hurricane, and it had climbed it like a spider. The face was hideous. The mouth was a sucking wound, opening and closing. The pale skin was mashed against the glass. It didn't have eyes, but it knew I was there. It was sensing my heat. It raised a hand. The fingers were long, tipped with black claws. It tapped on the glass. Tink, tink. It was testing the pain. Then, the main beam of the lighthouse swung around. The massive cone of 1,000-watt light hit the creature point blank. Scree. The sound was piercing. It wasn't just a scream. It was the sound of bacon hitting a hot pan. Steam erupted from the creature's skin. It convulsed, thrashing against the glass. Its gray flesh turned black and blistered instantly. It let go of the railing. I watched it fall backward into the dark, a smoking lump tumbling down to the rocks below. It is a weapon, I realized. The light burns them. But as the beam swung away, into the dark sector of its rotation, 2 more heads popped up over the railing. They were learning. They waited for the beam to pass. Then, in the 4 seconds of darkness, they scrambled up and hammered on the glass. Smash! Smash! A spiderweb crack appeared in one of the panes. When the light came back around, they ducked below the copper sill, hiding in the shadow. They were timing the rotation. I looked at the rotation gears. They were old brass gears, greased and heavy, powered by an electric motor. If I sped up the rotation, the beam would hit them faster. The dark interval would be shorter. They wouldn't have time to hide. I ran to the control pedestal. I grabbed the speed lever. It was set to standard. I shoved it forward to max. The gears groaned. The motor whined. The heavy lens started to spin faster. Whir. The beam became a strobe light. Flash. 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 Outside, the creatures screamed. The constant light was too much for them. They couldn't hide. I saw them losing their grip, falling off the tower in droves. Yeah, I yelled, laughing hysterically. Burn. Burn, you freaks. But my victory was short-lived. Crack. A loud snap echoed through the room. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. Smoke poured from the motor housing. The heavy lens shuddered and slowed down. No. I screamed. I had pushed the old motor too hard. I had blown the drive belt. The lens stopped. It stopped dead, pointing out to sea. The landward side of the tower, the side with the trapdoor and the stairs, was now in total darkness. The screaming stopped. The scratching started again. Louder. Faster. They knew. Below me, the pounding on the trapdoor resumed with a fury. They sensed the light had failed. They sensed the weakness. Crash. The trapdoor hinges snapped. The heavy tool chest was shoved aside like it was made of cardboard. The hatch flew open. A hand, gray and dripping with slime, reached through the gap. It grabbed the edge of the floor. I scrambled back, grabbing the flare gun from the wall box. I fumbled with the cartridge, my hands shaking so bad I dropped the first one. Come here, keeper, the voice hissed. A head rose through the hole. It was the biggest one yet. Its skin was scarred and pitted. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth that spiraled down its throat. I snapped the flare gun shut. I aimed at its open mouth. "Eat this," I whispered. Thump! The flare shot point-blank into the creature's gullet. It didn't explode. It stuck there, burning with the intensity of a welding torch. Red phosphorus burns even underwater. It burned right through the back of the creature's neck. The monster thrashed, gargling fire. It fell backward, knocking the ones behind it down the stairs. Whoosh! The flare ignited the old timber of the staircase. The dry wood, soaked in years of oil fumes, caught fire instantly. Flames roared up the stairwell. It became a chimney. The creatures screamed as the fire engulfed them. I heard them tumbling down, a cascade of burning bodies falling 100 feet to the bottom. But the fire was a problem for me too. Smoke was filling the lantern room. I was trapped at the top of a chimney. I looked at the main light. It was still out. I needed to restart it. Not to see, but to signal. The fire would attract the creatures, but the light would keep them at bay. And maybe, just maybe, someone would see the distress pattern. I grabbed the manual crank handle from the wall. I jammed it into the gearbox. It was heavy. The lens weighed 2 tons. I pushed. I grunted. The gears ground against each other. Slowly, agonizingly, the lens began to move. I turned the crank. Hand over hand. Sweat poured into my eyes. Sweep. The beam moved. It washed over the balcony. It washed over the sea. I established a rhythm. Push, pull. Push, pull. I turned that crank for 6 hours. The fire in the stairwell died down, leaving only smoke and charred wood. The creatures didn't come back. The fire had blocked their path, and the light kept them off the glass. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped, they would climb. My shoulders screamed. My hands blistered and bled on the iron handle. I cried. I prayed. But I didn't stop. When the sun finally rose, the storm broke. The gray light of dawn filled the lantern room, washing out the beam of the bulb. I let go of the handle. I collapsed on the floor, my arms numb. I waited. The scratching had stopped. I crawled to the gallery door and opened it. The cold morning air hit my face. I looked down at the rock. It was covered in black slime. There were scorch marks on the stone where the creatures had fallen. And floating in the water, bobbing in the calm surf, were hundreds of pale shapes. They were retreating, diving back into the deep. I saw a Coast Guard cutter on the horizon. They had seen the fire. When they broke down the door, they found me curled up under the lens, still clutching the wrench. They didn't believe me, of course. They said the fire was caused by faulty wiring. They said that creatures were just hallucinations from carbon monoxide poisoning. They said the slime was algae thrown up by the storm. But they couldn't explain the teeth marks on the steel door. They couldn't explain why the glass of the lantern room was etched with acid. I quit the service. I took my pension and moved as far inland as I could go. I live in Arizona now, in the middle of the desert. No water, no storms, just sand and sun. But I still sleep with the lights on. Every light in the house. I have a generator in the backyard, just in case the power fails. Because sometimes, when the wind blows across the dunes at night, it sounds like wet feet slapping on stone. And sometimes, when I look into the dark corners of my room, I can see the afterimage of a pale, eyeless face, waiting for the bulb to burn out. And I know, deep down, that they are still out there, in the dark water, waiting for the light to go out. Story 5. The tank that was supposed to be empty. Working the night shift changes you. It changes your sleep cycle, your social life, and eventually, your mind. You start to see things in the shadows that aren't there. Or at least, you hope they aren't there. My name is Ben. I work security at the Pacific Coast Aquarium. It is a massive facility, a labyrinth of blue-lit tunnels and glass tanks. During the day, it is full of screaming kids and flashing cameras. But at night, it is a tomb. The only sound is the constant, low-frequency hum of the water pumps. Hum. It vibrates in the floor. It gets into your bones. My job is simple. I walk the perimeter. I check the locks. I make sure the life support systems are green. Last Thursday started like any other shift. I clocked in at 11 p.m. The janitors had already left. I was the only human in the building. I did my first round. I walked past the tropical reef tank, where the clownfish were sleeping in their anemones. I walked past the otter exhibit. They were cute, floating on their backs, holding hands. Then, I reached the deep ocean wing. This is the newest part of the aquarium. It houses the massive main tank, a 3 million-gallon cylinder that holds the sharks, the rays, and the tuna. The glass is 10 inches thick, but at the end of the deep ocean wing, there is a smaller exhibit. It is a cylindrical tank, floor to ceiling, hidden in a dark alcove. It is labeled Exhibit 14, the Abyssal Zone. But here is the thing. Exhibit 14 has been under maintenance for 6 months. It is supposed to be empty. The sign on the glass says, "Do not approach. Drained for repairs." I walked past it, shining my flashlight on the floor. Tap, tap. I stopped. The sound came from inside Exhibit 14. I shone my light on the tank. The water was dark and murky. I couldn't see the back wall. "Hello," I whispered. "Is someone working in there?" No answer. I walked closer. The maintenance log on the wall said the tank was drained last week. But looking at it now, it looked full. The water was pressing against the acrylic. I put my hand on the glass. It was freezing cold. Tap, tap. Something hit the glass from the inside, right where my hand was. I pulled back. What the? I shone my flashlight beam into the water. The light cut through the murk. For a second, I saw nothing. Just floating particles of silt. Then, I saw a shape. It was hovering in the center of the tank. It looked like a jellyfish, but wrong. It was about the size of a basketball. It had a translucent bell, pulsing slowly. But hanging down from the bell weren't tentacles. They were fingers. Long, pale, human fingers. Dozens of them. They drifted in the current, twitching independently. I rubbed my eyes. "Okay, Ben. You need more coffee," I told myself. "It's just a decoration. A Halloween prop left over." I walked away. I finished my rounds. But I couldn't stop thinking about the tank. Why was it full? Why was it cold? At 2 a.m., I had to pass the deep ocean wing again. The lights in the hallway were flickering. That happens sometimes. The humidity messes with the wiring. I approached Exhibit 14. The sign, "Drained for repairs," had fallen off the glass. It was lying on the floor. And the glass was flexing. Acrylic is strong, but it isn't rigid. It bows under pressure. But this tank was bowing outward, pulsing with the rhythm of something inside. Thump, thump, like a heartbeat. I took out my radio. "Control, this is Ben. I have a situation at Exhibit 14. It looks like the tank is overpressurized. I think the pump is stuck on. Static. Copy, Ben. That tank is disconnected from the main grid. The pumps shouldn't be running." "Well, something is moving the water," I said. "It's churning in there." I stepped closer. The murky water had cleared slightly. The thing in the middle was gone. But now, there were things at the bottom. I aimed my light down. The floor of the tank was covered in sand. But the sand was moving. It was shifting, forming patterns. Spirals. Perfect, geometric spirals were being drawn in the sand. What puts sand in a maintenance tank? I muttered. Then, I saw the reflection. I was looking at the glass, seeing my own reflection in the dark room. But behind my reflection, inside the tank, something was floating. It was right behind my head. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. I turned back to the tank. A face was pressed against the glass. It was huge. It took up the entire viewing window. It was pale white, like the belly of a dead shark. It had no eyes, just smooth skin. But it had a mouth. A vertical slit that ran from its forehead to its chin. And the mouth was opening. Crack. A hairline fracture appeared on the glass. Right in front of the creature's face. I stumbled back. "Control. The glass is cracking. Exhibit 14 is failing. Get out of there, Ben," the radio screamed. "That tank isn't rated for pressure." The crack grew. It branched out like a lightning bolt. Crack snap. Water started to hiss out of the fissure. A high-pressure spray of freezing water hit me in the chest. It smelled like rot, like sulfur and old blood. The creature inside pushed against the glass. I could see its hands now, pale, webbed hands pressing against the acrylic, trying to shatter it. "Let me out." The voice didn't come from the tank. It came from the water hitting the floor. The splash sounded like syllables. I turned and ran. Boom. The glass exploded. 3,000 gallons of water erupted into the hallway. The force of it knocked me off my feet. I was swept down the corridor, tumbling in a wave of freezing, stinking water. I hit the wall hard. The water washed over me, filling my nose and mouth. I coughed, sputtering. I tried to stand up. The hallway was flooded. The water was knee-deep. The emergency lights were flashing red. And in the water, things were moving. The finger jellyfish. There were hundreds of them. They were floating in the flooded hallway, glowing with a faint blue bioluminescence. And behind them, splashing through the water, was the big one. I could hear its wet footsteps. Slap, splash, slap. It was tall. It had to hunch over to fit in the hallway. Its white skin glistened in the red light. The vertical mouth was open, tasting the air. I scrambled backward, crab walking away from it. "Help!" I screamed. The creature turned its head. It didn't have eyes, but it heard me. It lunged. I rolled to the side. Its massive hand slammed into the wall where my head had been. It punched through the drywall like it was paper. I got to my feet and ran. My boots splashed loudly in the water. I couldn't be stealthy. I ran toward the main lobby. The security office was there. It had a heavy steel door. I looked back. The creature was fast. It was galloping on all fours, its limbs twisting in unnatural ways. It was gaining on me. I reached the lobby. I slid across the wet floor and slammed into the security door. I swiped my keycard. Beep. Red light. "Come on." I swiped it again. Beep. Red light. The system was shorted out by the water. The creature burst into the lobby. It roared, a sound like grinding metal. I saw the front doors. Glass doors, leading to the parking lot. I grabbed a metal stanchion, one of those velvet rope poles, and threw it at the glass doors. Smash. The safety glass shattered. I dove through the broken window. I landed on the concrete sidewalk outside. The cool night air hit me. I scrambled up and ran to my car. I fumbled with my keys. The creature was at the door. It hesitated at the threshold. It sniffed the dry air. It didn't like the dry. It shrieked in frustration and backed away into the shadows of the aquarium. I drove away. I didn't stop until I was 3 towns over. I called the police. I told them a pipe burst. I told them the tank exploded. I didn't tell them about the monster. They investigated the next day. They found the flooded hallway. They found the shattered tank. But they didn't find the creature. They said it must have been washed out into the storm drains. The storm drains that lead to the ocean. I quit my job. I work in a library now. It's dry. It's quiet. But sometimes, when I'm walking home in the rain, I see them. Small, pale shapes floating in the puddles. And I know, it's out there. It escaped. And it remembers my scent. So if you ever go to the aquarium and you see a tank labeled under maintenance, don't tap on the glass. You might wake up what's sleeping inside. We have reached the surface. The water is calm. Thank you for listening. If you are still awake and you enjoyed these stories, please leave a like to help the channel grow. I will see you in the next video. But for now, let the ocean carry you to sleep. Good night.